Okay, but pretty soon Aristotle has this great headache from this split between the forms and the physical objects, and he's a biologist, right? And he's trying to get it all back together again, and he's trying to close that gap. And so his idea is then to kind of, instead of having them here, kind of go more like that and make them kind of mutually dependent. And as a result, to some extent, though I think there's an earlier late Aristotle and a late Aristotle, and there's lots of opportunity for argument because we don't really have what Aristotle wrote. We have what his students recorded of what he wrote. So anyway, it seems overall, at least the way I read it, that these ideal forms or ideas that are real then came to be more adjectival in Aristotle. Not fully adjectival as they become in the 14th century, but still there's a sort of a loss of a confident, now we were supposed to say robust, a robust ontology about these forms, okay? And in the, then in the Christian tradition, it's Platonic. It's also late medieval is Aristotelian, but in the earlier part, it's Platonic, and it also has this experience of the incarnation of the Christ and the transformation of human consciousness, and so where does philosophy come in all this? So there is philosophy, but it's within this context of the conviction that the wisdom, the logos, actually entered into human history through a divine human being. So this is a tremendously interesting, complex, compelling idea, so that thereafter philosophy then becomes subordinate to this theological vision. All right, but philosophy is still real, and there's a kind of an idea that philosophy, philo, love, and Sophia, wisdom, are kind of a spiritual pursuit. Not to everybody, but that sort of is the high point. So there's lady philosophy, there's loving Sophia within the context of an incarnational world, a world that's been transformed by a divine human event. This is the avatar in the Indian tradition, and it's Mahayana. You know this word Mahayana, the great way of the Buddhists, the way of the Buddha nature being discerned at the end of meditation and spiritual inquiry. But by the 14th century, particularly Occam, we're now into what comes to be known as nominalism, and we have a big argument in philosophy, which the nominalists win overwhelmingly, that the Platonic ideals, ideas, are adjectives, and they are found, in our ordinary thinking. They do not need intuition, meditation. They do not need, as in the Republic, 15 years of mathematics to get your brain ready to do philosophy. Now even though Occam was a Dominican monk, now you really can do it by not quite ordinary thinking, but close to ordinary thinking. But see, it's going to get more and more ordinary in terms of this non-intuition, and in favor of sort of an analytic power. Okay, so they kind of win overall. That goes into British empiricism with Locke and Hume particularly. And Kant tries to rescue it. It's very hard. I'm not going to do Kant today, though we could during questions, and I will leave time for questions. And then there's really, as you heard from Rick, this very exciting major position, minor position, the major position being the Enlightenment, scientific, kind of a universal thinking, overcoming superstition and prejudice and burning people in oil and all kinds of foolishness. The shadow side, as Rick explained so well, both in his book and the lecture, being a kind of an arrogance and a presumption that this is the only way, and that the other affective thinking and qualities are not to be counted. So it really then comes to be a kind of a materialistic thinking. It's hard to see that in Descartes, but that's what it leads to. So it's a step-by-step. And then there's this dramatic reaction. Anything that's romantic is dramatic. This dramatic response is the celebration of the imaginal and the poetic, the artistic, but as you know, as wonderful as they are, they don't really get power over the modern Western project, which has to do with measurement, surfaces, control, building, and really kind of a great project called progress. All right. So the romantic is always sort of trying to control that forceful project, and never able to do so from that time until the present. Now I have here something called Contemporary Romanticism Comes of Age. This is a bow to the Owen Barfield, who I think is one of the most wonderful thinkers and wonderful wise persons, exceedingly an exceedingly good example of a knowledge, vast amounts of accurate knowledge coming from a love of wisdom, love of the spirit, love of humanity, love of the whole vast evolution of consciousness, and leading to action, so that he then writes these very, very careful books that are useful to all of us. So he's one of my favorites. I think Emerson is another wonderful example. As well, all these people that I'm talking about are good examples in different ways. So if you look at a more detailed account, we've gone from a mythic Sophia goddess image, and then there's the biblical then brings that into a story of a people in time and space and land. God forbid, we know about the giving of the land and the reclaiming of the land, and the impossibility of putting one group of people on the land as though there were nobody there, when in fact there were Palestinians there. Just like the Western project of coming to this land as though there were nobody here. James Joyce says, Christopher Columbus, who, as everyone knows, was the last man to discover America. And if you think about that tomorrow, you'll see it's really very clever. So we did a little bit on this, Plato, Aristotle, Christian philosophy. Then I started to do this, Bacon, Descartes, Hume, Kant. And so what is the present thinking in the West? Well, it's there's many different varieties, but overall, according to Barfield, and I agree with him, it really is a positivist leftover. In other words, people like Stephen Hawking, whose latest book is being discussed on our PCC chat. No surprise if you read the first one, the Short History of Time. Surely 9 million people didn't read it, but those are the people who bought it. I did read it, and it was not nourishing. So, and the latest one is not nourishing. And it's a good example, I think, of what Barfield calls the residue of unresolved positivism. Namely, that there's any number of universes, and we simply don't know how they got started. We just don't know. It's not that interesting to know for him. So as Rick put in his email that I think he wrote last night, that Hawking is going over to an area where he is not skilled, which is metaphysics. Right? He's a very good scientist, but he doesn't really know, he hasn't really thought through what it means to say we don't know how it got started, or that it sort of, there's no explanation, might as well call it chance. right? This is a residue of unresolved positivism. It just takes more thinking of a certain kind in a certain question which he's not asking to come up with a better answer, which I think we get from, let's say, Whitehead and his concept of creativity, or Aurobindo's wonderful account of Satchidananda and the involution and evolution, and all these people have better answers than that. But I think Bergson and Whitehead, especially because they have rich scientific familiarity. Okay, and now another way of recovery, in addition to that romantic arc in the West. I put Jaspers here, but I can't remember it. I can't remember what's in it. So I'm eager. It's almost a marker for myself is to go back and read it. I did read it once. Okay, now outside philosophy, which may be the most exciting work that's being done for philosophy, so I include Steiner here, who is a real philosopher, has books, The Philosophy of Freedom and History of Philosophy, and lots of epistemology, kind of Goethean natural science philosophy. So I think he's a contender. The Russian sophiologists with respect to wisdom are contenders, the ones I mentioned, particularly Soloviev. Teilhard, I think, is a contender in his bringing together two major currents of Western experience that are almost always kept apart, particularly at the present time with this not very helpful warfare between science and religion. Here's Teilhard, this great scientist, member of the French Academy, truly a great world-class paleontologist and a totally devout Roman Catholic priest. And he does not have a headache. They do go together in his mind and heart. And his mind and heart are not separated. So there's a good example. And Jung, I think, also is a knower in multiple ways. And if you know his deep dive into the unconscious, beginning 1913, and now this amazing red book, or just read the Memories, Dreams, Reflections, you'll see that he has all this analytic skill and argument and medical science, and has at the same time this great affinity with myths and images and surprises, and especially synchronicity. So you all want to find out about what Rick knows about synchronicity. It's a really great subject. And I think we're also more and more, especially here in this program, have our eye out for these Asian sources, the Lao Tzu. If you've never read the Lao Tzu, these 81 verses, you'll see that it's a wonderfully wise way of thinking. It's just like, whoa, it keeps bringing you to the inner, to the inner, to the inner, to the rhythmic, right, to the aesthetic. And it's such a good antidote. If you only do Lao Tzu, it's not a good antidote. But since we already live in a Confucian world, it's such a good antidote. And Gandhi, who is sort of shockingly original. I mean, he goes back to the beginning with every question, every area, and he starts from scratch. Sometimes he doesn't get very far, and it's a little embarrassing because he says something that we sort of know isn't true or not a good idea. But the freshness of the experiments with truth is really wonderful, and there is love and service in his knowing, and he doesn't have any thoughts. No big sort of revealing, embarrassing kind of thoughts out of selfishness. They are all thoughts about how the human community can survive.